Good afternoon and welcome to Design Master Training. My name is David Robinson. Today we're going to be looking at one-line diagram graphics in Revit. Going to be looking at default customization that Design Master includes out of the box for you, just so that you understand how we put our families together so that you can use them and modify them for your own purposes in the single-line diagrams. If you're attending the training live, you can ask questions in the chat box. If you're watching the recording of the training, you can call or email your questions. Our phone number is 866-516-9497, and our email address is support@designmaster.biz. So we're going to be looking at the families that are included out of the box in Design Master. All of the graphics that we are including are standard Revit families. So we are using Revit's built-in default functionality for the graphics. So there's nothing that we're doing that's really beyond what Revit does, but we've put our families together in a specific way that we hope is going to be useful to people. So I just want to explain how our families are put together so that you understand that, you can use them properly, and then modify them as necessary. First thing to note is that our families are built assuming that you are going to use a 1:12 scale factor for your drafting view. So everything goes in a drafting view. You have a scale factor, and that's set when you create the drafting view. You can set it in properties. You want to set it to 1:12, and that's kind of how our stuff is built so that the text and the graphics end up matching each other in terms of size. We didn't use 1:1 because Revit actually doesn't deal with small distances very well. So if you go 1:1, you're drawing your stuff so small that Revit breaks on it. So if you scale everything up by 12 and you use 1 inch equals 1 foot, Revit's a little bit happier at that scale factor. So that's why we use 1:12. It also means if you're bringing stuff in and you created your stuff at a different scale factor, you're going to have to redraw your stuff at the different scale. Revit has some scaling commands. It's hit and miss as to how well they work because Revit doesn't really like the idea of scaling things. So you might be able to rescale your stuff to match ours or rescale ours to match yours. You also might have to redraw some of it depending on how it's put together. All of your customization, if you go to customization user options, we are pulling the families that we're going to use from this customization folder. If we open up that folder, you can go straight to it so you can see where it is. All of the files that we create, by default, we are shipping as Revit 2018 because that's the oldest version of Revit that we support. So they're 2018 files. We will convert them to the newer version of Revit that you're on. That kind of happens automatically in the background. As you're making changes on your own, if you do want to create new families, make sure that you're creating them in the oldest version of Revit that you're using. You don't have to match Revit 2018. That's what we're using, but use Revit 2020 or Revit 2021, depending on how old your projects are. Because if you create the family in something newer, you can't use it in older versions of Revit. So just bear that in mind as you're customizing your families. We're using 2018. You don't have to match that, but you do have to be somewhat careful about what you choose. I'm going to insert a new family. For all of our families, we have two types. We have the solid and the dashed, and that's just for controlling the line work. So if I take this panel and I put it in as solid, it will go in. It's going to choose a solid line work for it. If you want to modify that, you can select it. And again, using standard Revit features, we just have it set up as a different type in the family. You can change it to dashed. And so you can do that to get dashed line work. So depending on what you're drafting, you'll sometimes want solid lines, sometimes want dashed lines. This is how, using our customization, you can switch between those. We also have new and existing. We handle that with a toggle in the properties. So under graphics, we've got the DME existing. If you check that box, it's going to switch it to a lighter line weight. So we have that option for switching between new and existing. The appearance of all of that is controlled by your Revit settings for your line work. So if we open up this family in Revit, if we go to object styles, you'll see that we have a couple of object styles defined here. We've got the Design Master one line heavy, heavy dashed, light, and light dashed. When you insert the family into Revit, it's going to create these line types if they don't exist. If they do exist, it's going to use the settings that you've already got. So we kind of just had to choose something for the line weight. How you have your line weight set up, what line weight numbers are appropriate is going to vary by company. So you actually probably do want to make some changes to the line weights that we're using, but you can do that at the project level. So if we go into this project here and go to the object styles in the project, when you insert our families, it will create those object styles for you. You can also create them manually. So get those object styles in your Revit project, either by inserting one of ours or creating one with the same name. And then you can choose the appropriate line weight based upon the standards that you're using for your plotting. So we have heavy as line weight 5, medium is 4, light is 3. You can adjust that for whatever is appropriate for your company. In the same way, we've got the line patterns where you've got solid and dashed lines. We define a dashed line pattern. If you have another dashing that you want to use, you could change it out here. But the settings here, when you put something in, if it's using one of these line types, it's going to use what you've already defined. So you can define it in your project, in your template, and then when you pull in our stuff, it'll know to take the line types we have and map them to the settings that you've set. So just as an example, if we take this light and we change it from black to red, and that's actually the dashed one that we're looking at there, so make one more change. So the light dashed, it will change that line type there. So that's how Revit is controlling those. So that's where you can go to make adjustments to the line types to get them to plot properly for your purposes. Just so that you are aware of where the other settings that exist related to that are, for the line weights, that's in your additional settings. And this is where the line weights. So Revit gives you 16 line weights. You can set the weight of the pen when it plots here, harkening back to more old school drafting when you were actually drafting with pens and things of that nature, but they give you essentially 16 pen widths to play with. So this is where you set these. You should have these set up already in your company, and so just choose the appropriate line weight for the graphics that we have. Also, under additional settings, we have line patterns. This is where you set up the dashing, and this is where we have the DM dash line. If you edit it, so apparently I have 1/8 inch dashes, so it's an 1/8 inch dash, 1/8 inch space is getting plotted there. All of our text is using a 1/10 inch text style. That's defined in the annotation families. Those are a little trickier to change. Revit doesn't make it as easy. You really need to go in and modify the annotations to adjust those. So if you use a 1/8 inch text, you would need to modify our annotation labels to use that text style. So if we select this annotation family and we run the edit family command, and we select that piece of text, you can see that we have defined this 1/10 inch text. That's essentially Arial 1/10 inch. And so that's what we're using for our text. If you use something else, you'll need to load your type into our annotation families and update the types that are being used here. So we have annotation families. We also have some text embedded in our families. I'm going to modify this panel real quick and put a main disconnect breaker on it. When I do that, we'll talk about this in a moment, we add some family information, but we've got this text. It's actually embedded in this family. And so again, you'd have to edit that family, go find that tag, and then edit the tag and make the change here to the text size, and then load that into the family, and then load the family into the project. Customizing the graphics for single line diagrams does require you to be comfortable with how families work in Revit. So you'll want to be comfortable with creating families, modifying families, getting things loaded. We're using all standard Revit functionality. So everything you know about Revit, everything you can research about Revit applies to what we're doing, but you do have to, do that work to make sure that you understand how Revit's doing it. And then we leverage that to get our graphics for the single line diagram. So for the annotations, you'll notice that when we put in a family, we've got some embedded text, but we also have a lot of other text that comes in that's actually a separate family. You can annotation family that you can move. Revit does not natively have a way to say, when I put in this family, I also want to put in this annotation. So we had to create a little bit of a framework to support that. The way we do that is with a project that has the family and the annotations laid out. So for example, when I inserted this panel here, we inserted a label here and we inserted a label here. Just in standard Revit, if you just inserted this family, all you get would be the family and you wouldn't get any text. But you want to have consistent text, so we put together this framework to allow you to get that text in there as well. And so that is going to be in the family in the projects. So if we go to our customization folder, and if we sort this by name, you'll see that for pretty much everything, we have a Revit family, an RFA file, and then we have a Revit project, an RVT file. So the family is what's actually going to be inserted as the family. The project is what we are going to use to figure out where the annotations belong for that project. So if we open up one of these projects, I'm going to go to Revit 2018. We already did the panel connected from the top. So we'll open up that same panel that I inserted. And so you'll see that this project, it's not very complicated. It's a drafting view with the family inserted. So here's the graphic that we have, and then these two label annotations inserted as well. So when we insert this, you ask Design Master to insert this family, it's actually finding this family and then also finding these annotations and putting them all in at the same time in the same location for you. So you lay it out here so that it looks correct, and then when you insert it using our insert commands, we will insert the family and the annotations at the same time. So that's how we get all that information in. If I open up one of our switchboards, this switchboard is actually based on our panel family. This is the same panel with bus. We also have a panel family that's the same thing. We've changed the size. We've adjusted the dimensions here. So any changes you make to the family in terms of the shared parameters will also be transferred to the when you insert it. So we'll insert it and then we'll actually adjust the shared parameters so that we'll resize it. So if we go back to Revit, and if we do an insert link of one of those switchboards, you'll notice that it's one size right now, and after I insert it, it's actually going to get bigger. So Revit, when it's doing the insertion, uses the default size. So, and this is kind of like default Revit code. We don't have any ability to change how this works. So we say, Revit, I want to put in a family. Revit will put in the family for you, let you select a location. You put it in, and then Design Master says, okay, let's add those labels and let's resize it based upon how that project was put together. So you'll see that it made it a little bit bigger and it added that annotation tag as well. So that's what we're doing in the background to get all of this information in right. So if you want to add additional information, if you have different labels that you like to use, because I'm sure you do, you'll want to go to the projects and add those. So we, by default, are including some information, and it's admittedly not going to match what you typically use because everyone does their one lines a little bit different. So you'll need to go and add that. If you add that information to the projects, then your families will come in with the right information automatically. So you don't have to go back and add it as a second step. You can do that, but it's not going to be as efficient. So you want to get that in spend a little bit of time, customize your projects with the correct annotations in there. When we do the insertion of the family, we've got the family name essentially. So we look for a project with that name first. If we find it, we use that. If we don't find it, we do look for a family at that point, and we'll just insert the family without anything else. When we insert the project, we look at the name of the family in there. So if I go back here, So we'll look in the project, we'll find the family, and we'll find that name, and then we'll actually insert that family from the family that's either in the project already or that's stored separately from this project. So that if you're using this family in a bunch of your projects to define where all of your tags go, you don't have to go back and redefine it if you make a change to how the family works. And actually, we don't with ours. So a lot of our project files have old versions of our families in them, but those are never used because we pull the latest version of the family from disk rather than from the project. So when you're updating your families, you can just update them on the disk, the family itself. You don't have to go back and update all the projects that use it. All of these labels are pulling shared parameters. So if we click on this family and we look over here in properties, it has, if you scroll down, all of the Design Master shared parameters here. And it's actually not all of them. It has some of them. The DMER parameters map to Revit built-in parameters. So there's an apparent load phase A. So we map that parameter in Revit to the DMER apparent load phase A. So the DMER ones are a little special, and so we do special translations from the Revit value to ours to get that information in here. The rest of these shared parameters, all the other Design Master ones, we don't actually do anything special. We just, if there is a parameter with this name in the model and on the single line, we transfer it. It works out well with our stuff because we've got it built in so that everything has matching names. It also means that you can transfer your own shared parameters to the single line without having to do anything really very special. You just create a shared parameter in the model and you create the shared parameter in the single line, and as long as they match, it will transfer them. So if we go look at this device in the model, it has all of those shared parameters that are defined because Design Master has defined them. But if you have shared parameters that you define, just give it the same name, and then in your single line, embed that in your family as well, and Design Master will transfer that for you. So if there's additional information you need to transfer, and there often is other information that we don't take care of, that's how you transfer it. We actually don't include all of the Design Master shared parameters. Transferring them is a little bit time consuming, and we have a lot. So we cut down the list of parameters we include by default to the ones that seem like the most commonly used, the most likely that you would use. So if there's a shared parameter that we include that's not linked, you could link it the exact same way. And the way you do that is you can edit this family and you add the shared parameter just using the standard family types functionality. So you can load your shared parameters or you can load ours. You can create the new parameter, and if it's a shared parameter, select it. We ship a shared parameter file with our software. By default, ours is in the install folder. So if you go to Program Files, Design Master Software, there's Electrical RT. Then we have all of these shared parameter files. They vary slightly based upon the version of Revit. So just, and generally they just add stuff. So use the oldest one that matches, the same version of Revit that you're using for your families, and then it'll have all the stuff that would exist for all the others. But you can select your shared parameter file. And then with Design Master, you'll get all of our shared parameters. You can choose the ones that you want to add to the single line family so that the information gets transferred. So that's how you can add additional shared parameters to the families. And then you also use those shared parameters to create new annotation tags. So we include a number of annotation tags that are inserted by default. There are also a number that we ship that aren't otherwise used that you can load. And you load those, again, using standard Revit functionality. So if we run go to Insert and do Load Family and go to the Design Master Customization folder. So now we've got all of our families and everything else. All of the tags we have, we call them DME-tags. So all of our tags have a common name, so you can find them. So you can come find a tag and use one of our tags if you want to, or you can add to this if you want to add something that we don't have. So for example, say we want to show the voltage drop. We've got a voltage drop tag. The C, L, and R we have at the end is whether the tag is center, left, or right justified. So that's the naming scheme that we use. So that, again, it's consistent and you know how it's going to look. So we can add this tag. So we've loaded it, and now we can annotate, and we can tag this thing here. By default, it'll use the last tag that you loaded, but you can then select a different tag. But so we've got the voltage drop. So the voltage drop to here is that value. That way, if you want to add additional information, that would be the way you do it. And then if you want to adjust how these tags look, you go and you modify the annotation family. So click this, and I edit the family. Maybe we want to add a label saying this is voltage drop. And then we load that back into the project, and it'll update it with that additional information. So everything that you know about creating annotations, the way all that works, we just use standard Revit annotations for getting the information onto the single line diagram. When you insert things with our software, we have the list of graphics. And this list is one that is controlled by a customization file. And you can get to that under going to customization. We have a list of graphics for devices and then a list of graphics for feeder segments. And so this is a text file. We don't have a fancy interface. At some point we might put one together, but right now you just have to manually modify this text file. At the top, we have the different types of groups. We've grouped them into panels, transformers, other distribution equipment, and then branch circuit equipment. If you wanted to have other groups, and this is just for organizing it so you can find your graphics easily. And then we have below that the actual entries that you can select. We've got the name, and this is what shows up in the Design Master user interface where you can select this name. And then we have the actual family name, and this is what it's going to go look for, either for a project with that name or a family with that name. So if you want to add things, you can just copy a line and modify the text to have it, give it a new name and point to a new family. So that's the general overview of how our families and customizations are put together. Now I want to walk through some of the specific settings for the families that we have, just to show you how some of them work and how we put together a little bit more in the specifics for them. So let's first look at panels. When you go to insert a panel, we've got a couple different options that we include. We've got a panel fed from top, fed from bottom. So you control whether the connection is where it's going to be made, if it's got the feeder coming in from above or below. And these are just going to be standard boxes. We also have the same option, but with a bus bar in the middle, if you want to have that for your panels. And then we have the switchboards, which are bigger than the panels essentially, and with a little bit more going on with the graphics. So we've done the panel fed from the top. We can also do we'll do a panel with a bus here, just so you can see what that looks like. So it has the box, and then it's also got the bus bar. If you select the panel, we have some of these control points to resize and adjust how the graphic looks. So you can adjust these panels. It comes in at one size by default, but you can adjust it. As you do that, Revit guesses as to where it thinks this label should be. So once you're done getting the size right, you usually have to move your label at that point to get them back where they belong. If you put a main disconnect on a family, Design Master will include that for you automatically because we've set the families up to do that. So if I edit this panel and I change it to a main breaker, it will put in the breaker and the breaker size. There is a shared parameter, main disconnect type, that's a numeric value, 0 for nothing, 1 for a breaker, 2 for a fuse switch. We use that in the family itself to control the visibility of some things. And so that's how we're getting that graphic to change. So Design Master fills in that main disconnect type based upon what you're setting in the panel edit. and then we use that to adjust the graphics. So that's how we're having that happen. So again, it's something that you could do with your families as well if you want to have your families adjust based upon the disconnect type. But we have it built in with our families so that they look correct if you're just using our stuff out of the box. We have a toggle for the top lugs, which is this little piece here. So you can just toggle that on and off, depending on what you want. The bottom lugs, we actually control based upon whether that's set in Revit. So if we go highlight this device, Revit half implemented feed through and top lugs. So if we come in here in Revit and we specify that this is a feed through lugs, and then we need to get this to update. If we run an edit, I believe that will get it to pull in the new values. So it pulls in that change, and so it'll put in the bottom lugs automatically as specified in Revit. So if you do that through Revit, we pull that information through. So that's what we have for the panel. Just want to show the other switchboard graphics. We have the horizontal switchboard fed from top or bottom. For these, you have the main disconnect is this horizontal or this vertical piece, and then the horizontal is where other connections would be made. So that's what the horizontal switchboard looks like with the top and bottom. The bottom would flip this down below. We've got the horizontal fed from left and right, and that's just where you're going to have a horizontal bus bar without that vertical piece. And then we have the horizontal with tab. That's where you have this bump, or we call it a tab. I don't know what you actually would call that, but you've got this additional little piece coming out here. Different people draft their switchboards differently. Some people will do the main disconnect portion like this. It ends up looking something like that for their switchboard. So if you want your switchboards to look like this, we've got that graphic available. And you can adjust these and pull the pieces around to get the sizing right. And then we have the vertical switchboard, which is exactly the same as the panel with bus, just wider. Mostly this will mean that when you make the connections, there's more room for the pieces that are being connected, because you usually have lots of panels coming off the switchboard. So you'll want to be able to show those and the breakers inside it. So this has room for the breaker and the breaker size inside the panel. For transformers, we have options for a diagrammatic transformer, and we have them with boxes, without boxes, and with this ground and without the ground. So if we modify this transformer graphic, we've got box, ground, and then whether it's fed from the top, bottom, left, or right. So you kind of throw all those combinations together and you get a bunch of different options. So whether you're using a box by default and a ground by default, this is a box and a ground. If I go no box, no ground, you end up with just the transformer symbol. I'll change it now to a box with no ground. And the ones that are boxes, they can have that solid dashed type that you can choose. That's standard with all of our one-line stuff. For utility transformers, we have some more, some families that are a little more realistic looking. We've got this transformer mounted on a pad. We also just added pole-mounted transformers. If you have a pole-mounted and the utility is really fussy that you have the transformer looking like it's mounted on a pole, you can do that. And there you go, little pole-mounted transformer. It's at least our cartoon representation of it to give the idea that, okay, this is up on a pole. And then we also have just a standard box if you want fewer details on your transformer. And if you wanted to adjust the customization yourself, this would probably be a good one to start with. Take this box, and then you could make adjustments. If you wanted to modify the graphics, this would be a good starting spot. It's a pretty simple family. We also have other distribution equipment. This covers the other type of stuff that you might use that's not a panel or a switchboard. We just added meter centers. I'm going to come back to that because those are fairly complicated in how we put those together. We've got a transfer switch so that you can use these obviously for transfer switches if you have them. If you have two connections, it will know to make the connections for the feeders to the two different connection points. These have resizing as well, so you can resize the transfer switch if you want to make it a little bigger, so you can add additional information to it. You can fit it inside. So we've got the transfer switch. We can do a generator. Obviously, this would not be a generator graphic, but just for purposes, that's what a generator ends up looking like. We added a fire pump controller recently. We have just a standard junction box, so if you need that for any purpose, you can use a junction box. That's just going to be a circle with a J. And I believe we have a disconnect also. And for the disconnect, there's actually a couple different options. So based upon the type, we can do a fused or a non-fused disconnect, so you can toggle that. And then you can also flip the side that the little handle's on using that toggle there. And then for branch circuit equipment, this is a motor connection. We can also do an equipment connection. So if it's not distribution equipment, but actually something on a branch circuit motor, a piece of equipment, we can do that. And it has the same junction box and disconnect families available as well. So those work the same as the panel ones. So now let's go back and take a look at the meter center. We'll take this CTP, we'll pretend it's a meter center. When we put in the meter center, it's not actually terribly exciting. The meter center, the centerpiece that actually is linked in Design Master, it's really just a box. Where it gets interesting is that you actually need to have the meters, and so those we handle with separate families that you insert manually using standard Revit. So if we do insert, I'm going to load from family, we go to the Design Master customization folder, and we search for the meter center. So we've got the meter center, and that's the center, the middle piece of the meter center. We've also got a left and a right piece for the actual meters. We'll load both of those. So now we have those families available, and we can insert them. So you can just use Revit to insert a detail component, and then you'll have the meter center left and right. So I can put this one in. These are just graphics at this point. They're not going to be linked to anything in your Revit model, but you can at least fill them out and have the information that you need. So if you select it, you'll see that we've got a number of text parameters that you can use to control the text that's being displayed. So we could give the meter a name. Maybe this is, for unit 101, and maybe it's a 100 amp meter. So we'll just fill that information there for you. And you can go down. We have by default a maximum of 6 meters. And it's just, a little bit of data entry to get it filled out. We also have some dimension variables. So if you don't want to have all 6 meters, you could change it to say just 2 meters. So we change the meter count, and that'll change the number of meters that are shown, so we can get rid of those extras. If your whole thing isn't 6 meters tall, you can adjust that meter max value, set that to 4, and then you also would want to set it on this one to match, and on this one. And so now we have a meter center with 4 meters. If you need anything more than 6 meters, just stack 2 of them on top of each other, and then you can have up to 12 and more if you need it. So that would be our suggestion for getting more than 6, because you do kind of have we had to have a fixed number just because of how Revit handles its parameters. So each little section can have up to 6. So if you need more than that, just stack them and you can get more. So that's just some graphics we have available to help with the drafting of meter centers. The centerpiece is really the piece that's linked in Design Master where all the information and intelligence is. This is pure drafting at this point, just to get the meter center information communicated properly on the one line, but not actually linked to the Revit model at all. And finally, we have graphics that show up on the feeder segments themselves. The list is controlled by this feeder graphics text file. We have a number of different groups where we've kind of organized them: breakers, switches, disconnects, meters, plain segments, which are used for when we're just drawing a segment, and then IDs, which are used for the feeder IDs. The rest of these are just kind of graphics that we use. And then we've got the list of the different graphics available. Again, the project file where you can set up your annotations, and then the actual family. When we insert these, we've got the family has the feeder segment and then also this graphic all as one piece. So the types control what the feeder segment looks like. So if I adjust this to medium dashed, it's going to be a medium dashed line for the segment, or light dashed. It does not control the breaker graphic. That is controlled by this toggle here. So if I click that, it will go to an existing line weight. So that way you can have your breaker and your feeder segment graphics adjusted separately. When you run the feeder phase command, it's really changing that type. So I can run that feeder phase, select this feeder, and you choose a new type, and it will set all of these to that type if it exists. So if I choose light solid, it'll go through this whole feeder, each of these families, and if that light solid exists, it'll use it. So if you want to add additional types and graphics, just make sure it exists for all the different pieces that you use, then Design Master knows to adjust it on those other ones. If it doesn't exist, it'll leave that where on the type it was on before. We can add a graphic. So when you add the graphic, you have the options here. We've got a number of different breakers. We've got switches. And then we have a couple of different disconnects. The fused and the non-fused are actually separate files here, not combined into one like they were with the equipment. And then finally the meters. The meters actually have a couple different pieces that you can move around on them. That gives you the option to resize this. You can adjust where the meter sits on it, and then you can adjust how far out the meter is so you can get that drafting how you want it. Then we also have the utility meter. So that's what the utility meter looks like. And so there's the CT meter, and you can adjust where that one, how far that one is away from the feeder segment, same as the other meter. And for the feeder IDs, you can again adjust where the feeder ID lives, so you can move that around. You can also adjust the width of this box. That you do by modifying this width value here. It's not a little pull piece. You actually just type in a new value, and you can adjust how wide that is. That is it for the customization in single line diagrams. So again, that's the default customization out of the box, how it works, how we're thinking that you're going to work with it with your existing settings, particularly your line styles, lines, weights, and settings of that nature. And you can customize these to make the graphics look how you want. So you can modify these families. You can use ours as a starting point or use your own. Thank you for watching today's Design Master training. Contact us with questions or comments by calling 866-516-9497 or emailing support@designmaster.biz.